make this as interactive as possible. So, when you have your question, go ahead and ask it. And, I'll go through some of the slides. Cheryl will go through some. After we do the slides, we'll look at the application materials for the local process. And you'll see what I mean a little bit more as we go through here when I say the local process. So let's go to the next slide, please. So, the state of California has the Emergency Solutions Program, in which it receives federal emergency solution grant funds for distribution to programs around the state. And so they've just released a multi-year ESG NOFA, Notice of Funding Available, for $39 million over 3 program years. So it's going to be $15 million in the first year, then $12 million in the 2 years that follow. And the eligible activities for ESG are listed here, but they're, street outreach programs, emergency shelter programs, except you can't build a shelter. You can only use the money for operations or supportive services. Rapid rehousing programs, we've already talked a little bit about that during the introductions. And in fact, 40% of all of the funds spent in our jurisdiction are required to be for rapid rehousing programs. That's a state requirement. Homelessness prevention is also eligible, but not as a standalone project. Typically, homelessness prevention would be, as a set-aside portion of a rapid rehousing project, because homelessness prevention is like rapid rehousing, except that it serves a different population, a population which is at risk of homelessness but not yet homeless. So no more than 10% can be for that population, and not a standalone project. And then you can also work in HMIS funding if you need that for your project. The eligible applicants are nonprofit agencies who serve eligible populations and provide the eligible program type, or local government units that either directly provide the services or subcontract with nonprofits to provide those services. Next slide, please.
I also wanted to mention that you're welcome to ask questions as we go along. We don't want to speak to you. We want to, have a conversation. So if at any point in time, there's something you'd like us to clarify again, please let us know. Thank you. Sorry. Okay.
So this year has big changes. I don't know if which of you have been following this, but the state went through a process to revise the entire ESG program. So in that process, they adopted new ESG program guidelines, which are now posted on their website. And so some of the biggest changes are they moved from a 1-year NOFA cycle to a 3-year cycle. So it says here 24, 27, 30, etc. That's because they were slow. We're in the 24-year, but since they released this NOFA so late, that's why we're in it. In reality, it's not 2025, but it's the 2024 NOFA year. So they're also moving from a single year to a multi-year standard agreement with agencies that receive the funds. So what this means is they'll have a 3-year, they'll put out a 3-year standard agreement with a not to exceed amount. But since HUD or the federal government doesn't award the state all 3 years of funds, they only have annual awards. Then once the state receives the 2nd year and the 3rd year of funds, they will modify your contract. There would be no need for you to reapply. You would just participate in a contract modification to receive the additional funds for years 2 and 3. That's the way they say it's going to work. So then, the contract period of performance for each annual amount will typically be 21 months. Although in the first year it's going to be 19 because they got started late. And, you know, this gives you plenty of time to spend each annual amount of funds. And that's sort of the intent. Next slide, please. So this kind of shows you how the multi-year contract's going to work. So year 1 funding, you receive a certain amount. You would have 19 months to spend it, which, you know, will carry you into 2026, possibly, but you don't have to take all that time to spend the money. You can spend it all in the first year. And most agencies would typically do that. So the next year, you know, shows you, you know, 2020, you receive a contract amendment giving you funds from the ESG 2025. That would carry, the contract year would carry you into 2027. And then the last year would carry you as far as 2028. So what this is showing is you've got plenty of time to spend the money. That a 3-year contract might stretch out to 5 years in terms of, you know, the program year, just to give you plenty of time to spend the money. It doesn't have to stretch out that long, but it's important because as the state is going to have penalties for not spending all your funding on time. So if you didn't spend your first year of funds, you know, within the 19 months, then you would, you know, the HCD will take away the following 2 years of funding. And then our CLC would have to reallocate, we would still have the funds, but we would have to reallocate them to another agency. So I hope that's clear. You can study this graph if you want. Next slide, please.
So this will be me. Thanks, Tony. So talking about the 3-year funding cycle, Santa Cruz County, our estimated allocations in total is about 719,000, so 718,188. So 2024 allocation, quote unquote 2025, because the NOFA came out late, is 299,232. Estimated 2025. So if you recall what Tony shared, for the first funding year, that would be the 299. Then the next funding year, 2025 funding year, that's 209,000. That's the maximum program funding that we as a COC can submit. Now, once again, Tony would go into the different kinds of programs. We can actually submit to HCD up to not more than 2 projects to HCD. So we'll talk about how that split could look like, but this is the total amounts that we can have. And then the year 3 funding amount is also 209,478. Now, for the role of the Housing for Health Partnership, which is our division and quote unquote COC administrators, HCD requires us as a local continuum of care to carry out a fair and objective process through our review and ranking project, through the review and ranking of projects. I think quite a few agencies represented here. I know we have a few that have not gone through similar process before, but we do go through a review process. So for every agency that, you know, chooses to submit an application, whether it's rapid rehousing, whether it's outreach or shelter or any of the eligible projects, we at the COC would bring together an ad hoc group of individuals from our policy board and our lived expertise action board members that form a review and ranking committee. And we're going to look at all the applications, rank them, and then select the ones that would be pushing through to HCD. Now, all participants, all applicants must participate in the ESG H4H process. So that includes this orientation, the review process, technical assistance we'll be providing after this. And under our state rules, the Housing for Health partnership may recommend no more than 2 projects. So I had stated this earlier, we can either send one big project or recommend no more than 2. So that is something to keep in mind. I know we have a lot of agencies here, but just to clarify, no more than 2 agencies can actually be sent back to HCD as our final selection. I see a question here. That's okay, Justine, perfectly fine. Now, for this ESG round is going to be a 2-step application process. Like I mentioned, some people have had similar experience through the HUD, the regular annual HUD NOFA, and this is also similar. There will be a local application process and then the HCD application process, and every applicant has to go through these processes. So if your organization chooses to move forward, you will be submitting the local application. The application materials will be on the Housing for Health website. After this meeting, I'll be sending out another notifications and links and documents so you all have access to it, but it will be on the Housing for Health website. We will carry out our review and ranking of all local applications, like I mentioned, and recommend maximum 2 projects that can apply for HCD funds. Now, after we review and rank them, we have to send it back to the Housing for Health Policy Board to approve our project recommendations. So that is the board that oversees all our funding decisions, policies, and regulations. Now, step 2 would be the HCD application. So this will be new to some of you. There is a state portal called the eCivis portal that once you are done with the local application, you would have to go into the HCD state portal and complete and submit your application in that as well. So it's a twofold process. Tony and I will be with you along the way. It's not too complicated. If anything, a few people who have actually looked at some of the materials in the past would say it feels like a lot of information, but if you take your time and you go through step by step, it's pretty much straightforward. And then Housing for Health is going to submit our own recommendations into that state portal as well.
Yes, Meryl, I'd like to add to that. It probably doesn't make sense for applicants to submit the HCD application until you have been approved.
Mike just adds that, yeah.
Because it'd just be extra work, because if you're not approved to submit, then there's no point in submitting the HCD application. That's all. You can go in and look at it. You could register for it. You could even complete it if you wanted to, but really it's, I would wait.
Okay, so now let's talk about timelines, because I know this is also critical. On January 31st, that is in a few days, HCD is going to open the state portal. Once again, you don't need to go in there at this time to submit anything, because you need to complete the local process first. February 14th, 2025 at 5 p.m., that is the deadline to submit local applications to Housing for Health. Like I said, as part of this, before this information went out, we added all the links and documents. It's on the Housing for Health partnership website. We will send you another information right after this session today with the links for you to access all the application documents. So your deadline is going to be February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day, though. And on February 20th, 3 to 5, the review committee is going to meet to review the project and select a maximum of 2 projects, like I indicated earlier. Then February 26th, our policy board is going to meet to approve the final project that has been recommended by the review committee. March 29th, please note this date as well, is the deadline for all recommended applicants to submit their applications into the state portal. Like Tony mentioned earlier, if your project doesn't go through or is not recommended by Housing for Health, you are not required to do that. Your work ends on February 14th, and then we would inform you if your projects didn't go through. But for projects that will be moving forward, you have up to March 29th to submit in the state portal. That's the eCivis portal. And then hopefully by July 2025, we don't have the exact date, ESG, HCD is going to announce all projects that have been awarded, and then the amounts that have also been awarded. Any questions so far? Just doing a pulse check. Okay, we're good. Now, these are some additional key requirements as part of this notice of funding application. A lot of them, I think Tony has mentioned already. Minimum of 40% of your contract award has to go towards rapid rehousing. It could be mixed use, whatever it is, 40% has to be rapid rehousing at the
May I add that,
minimum.
Cheryl?
Yeah,
What they're looking for is 40% across. So if you had
across.
one contract, it would be 40% of that. If we had 2 contracts, it would be 40% across.
Percent of that.
So that would mean that, you know, both contracts wouldn't have to be rapid rehousing, but so.
Okay. Then if you have an eligible project, for example, you have a rapid rehousing project and you have some folks who are not literally homeless and want to provide some prevention services for them, homelessness prevention of that dedicated amount cannot exceed 10%. That is part of the statute. It cannot exceed 10%. Rental assistance, I know some few organizations noted that they are seeking to do some rental assistance support for their clients and families and households. It cannot exceed the fair market rate. Now, we know that Santa Cruz County has a little bit of a problem. HCD is working on it. HCD is seeking some waivers, and we will update you on this. But in the meantime, for your application, your rental assistance amounts cannot exceed fair market rate for Santa Cruz County. Now, and every program that any organization or agency wants to apply for. So some folks who want to do a bit of street outreach or rapid rehousing, you need to have program policies and procedures as part of your application. Now, these policies and procedures has to be within the HCD standards. These standards can be found on the website. We at Housing for Health also have our policies and procedures that models the HCD standards, and it can also be found on the Housing for Health website. I will be providing links to our policies and procedures. I believe a lot of the organizations represented here already have theirs, but please, we'll need you to review it all this fiscal year, to make sure that it's actually meeting the HCD standards and Housing for Health standards. Now, Tony talked about penalty, and this is really, really important because for this particular NOFA, if you do not spend 100% of the amount that is given to you within the spending period. So going back to, let me go back to this particular side. So funding year one, you get awarded $299,000. You have between 12/1/24 to 9/1/26. If you do not spend the funds within the spending period, HCD is going to penalize you for the next two funding cycles, which means for the next two funding cycles, funding year 2 and 3, you will not be allocated any funds. And Housing for Health, which is the COC governing body, will have to reallocate that amount of money to another agency. So that is something to just be mindful of as you are planning and working on your applications, because this is something that they are also taking very seriously. It is a spending problem. And so please ensure that once you get the funding, you do spend it out 100% on or before the due dates of that particular funding year. Now talking about match, that's another important thing. It's critical that for every dollar that you're requesting for, you have a matching dollar for that. So it's going to be 100% match requirement, whether cash and or in kind. That's also something to note. It could be all cash, it could be in kind, and it could be a combination of cash and in kind match as well. And for the last 3 points, we are definitely following the Housing First model, Housing First policy, advancing racial equality and equity. It's critical to note that as part of your applications as well, making sure that it's fully clear and presented in your narrative responses in the application portal. And then you would also need an environmental review. Some of you, I'm so sorry, Mike is asking, do other grants count towards the 100% match? Or it
Yes.
should be, it does.
Yeah. In general, yes.
Okay.
Other federal grants, other state grants, other private grants, yes. But not other ESG grants.
Okay. Then finally, we're going to need a board resolutions. For any organization, we will need your board members to actually provide and authorize the organization to apply for this funding. Please note that it must be on the HCD template. The state has its own template and model that they are expecting every organization to do. Now, if your organization, for example, Housing for Health, has its own board authorization template, you are required to have both. So you have your internal organization board authorization resolution, and you need to have the HCD template as well, which can be found on the HCD website. In our email, we will make sure to add the link that you can actually access the HCD board authorization template. That is also important because with all of that, if it's not within the HCD framework, your application may either not be scored at all or it may not even get awarded. So please know that these are the critical things to know.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Yeah. Yes.
So I think with the board authorizing resolution, it's important to get started early on the process, especially if it will take you time to get the resolution signed, because it's if you're selected by the local COC to move forward to submit an application to HCD in the eCivis portal, you have to have a signed resolution to submit by the deadline. And they will reject your application if your board authorizing resolution is not signed.
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Yeah.
So next slide, back to you.
Okay, so I think we've touched on this a bit, the number of local projects and minimum and maximum ESG grant requests. So Our policy board will recommend either one project for all the funds or two projects, each to receive a portion of the funds. That's what we're looking for, either one or two. It hasn't been decided yet whether it's going to be one or two. It just depends upon, what the review committee receives and, their process for making recommendations to the board. So each applicant must request 3 years of funding. So we're looking for, 3-year applications. You should be prepared, and you will have to adjust your budget if the board recommends a higher or lower amount. And that could happen. Like they could say, all right, well, look, we want you to apply for more or less, as a way to split the money. So, yeah, so be prepared for that. If you have a problem with, if the project doesn't make sense at a lower amount, or if you don't want more money, you should note that in the application so that we're aware of it. So locally, we have minimum grant amounts and maximum grant amounts. So the minimum will be $74,000 for the first year, and then $52,000 for the following 2 years. So that's basically 25% of the funds available as the minimum grant request. We don't want grants that are less than 25%. And the maximum would be the total amount that's available to our community, which is $299,000 for the first year, and $209,000 for the second and third years. Now in that case, you'd be requesting the entire allocation just for one project. So yeah, minimum and maximum. Next slide, please. Well, actually, can we go back to that for a minute? I wanted to touch on something. As you can see, the HCD has structured this 3-year grant to give more money in year 1 than in years 2 and 3. The reason they gave for that was to adjust to this new 3-year system. Not sure if it really helps to adjust, but what it means is that you're looking at a decrease of ESG funds in years 2 and 3. So you should be thinking about that ahead of time, how you're going to fill that gap or how you're going to decrease the program. Hopefully you'll have other funding to fill the gap. And also, we'll just leave it at that. Next slide. Oh, yeah, one other thing I did want to mention about that, sorry, previous slide, is that those years, the years 2 and 3 amounts are estimated. We won't actually know how much is available for years 2 and 3 until HUD allocates ESG funds for those years. So like if suddenly there's larger federal allocation, then it could be more than 209,000. So just keep that in mind. Next slide. So the local funding priorities. So the Housing for Health Policy Board, which is our lead COC entity, has set local ESG funding priorities. They had a conversation about it. They've reviewed the situation. They've set local funding priorities, which will be used in our local process. So the high priority projects are those which are rapid rehousing programs that are high performing, that are targeted to serving families with children exiting emergency shelters. And that could be including youth or DV shelters, and which use at least 50% of their ESG funds for rental assistance, as opposed to housing stabilization services. So yeah, so it's really that they're looking at a specific type of rapid rehousing program, which is well linked with family emergency shelter. It's there to provide a way out of family emergency shelter into permanent housing using rapid rehousing, and especially providing rental assistance funds. So a medium priority project would be any other rapid rehousing program. Could be a rapid rehousing program serving a different population, or which does not provide 50% of its funds for rental assistance. You know, say it only was providing 25% of funds for rental assistance. That would be a medium priority. An emergency shelter project would be medium if it provides housing assistance and supportive services. So it's the type of emergency shelter program in which you're enrolled as a client for in order to receive not only a place to sleep, but also housing assistance and supportive services, and that you eventually exit the emergency shelter, hopefully for a permanent housing location, but for whatever place it is. So it's an emergency shelter that's focused on housing, that's focused on helping people. That's a medium priority. Now, a low priority would be a night-to-night emergency shelter with limited services. So that, you know, that could be, you know, just a program where, you know, you're not enrolled until you exit to housing, but you come and go as you want, night by night. You're enrolled and disenrolled every day, and with just limited services. So it's really focused on, you know, the important thing of getting you off the street and into a bed, but, you know, not much beyond that. So street outreach is also low priority. HMIS is low priority, as are any other projects that are eligible. So if you look at the RFP document, which is on the website, you'll see on page 8 and 9 has more details about what these priorities are. Are there any questions about this?
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Great. All right, well, next slide, please. Okay, so the local application submission requirements. So this is our local process, you know, to select people that we'll recommend to the state. So deadline, February 14th. We've got a local application form. We'll look at that in a minute. We've got a local 3-year project budget. We'll look at that. We have, you'll have to submit the governing board authorizing resolution. When you submit that to us, it doesn't have to be signed. But again, as I said before, it's got to be signed. If you're selected to go forward to the state, you have to have it signed before you submit to the state. So we've got some needs narratives, 1-page maximum. We have a supplemental narrative for agencies that have received ESG funding in the past 2 years. We just want to know how that's going. And then you'll have to submit an HMIS or comparable database report for, you know, the 1-year period listed here or the most recent 12-month period. A comparable database, you know, most agencies would have HMIS. They participate in the Homeless Management Information System. The comparable database, there are certain agencies like domestic violence providers who are prohibited by law from entering data into HMIS due to confidentiality and safety concerns. So what they're required to do is have a separate comparable database, which is locked down only to their agency. They can submit a report with no identifying information. That's just like an HMIS report, but it comes out of their comparable database. Then we'll also need an expenditure report for the program type that you're applying for. So if it's rapid rehousing, we'd like to see an expenditure report for the same year. Evidence of leverage and match commitments. So there's the 100% match requirement we were talking about, but we're using leverage as a scoring criteria. That's, the policy board was wanting to do that. So if you have more than the 100% required match, then that additional amount would be leverage. We'll be counting the match plus any additional funds or in kind as your total leverage, and it's a scoring factor. So worth 10 points. Then the written, we will want to see the written policies and procedures because that's required. You'll be required to submit those written policies and procedures by program type to the state. So we want to review those. And again, like if you have more than one program type, say you're a rapid rehousing program that is also proposing prevention, homelessness prevention, you would need policies and procedures for both rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention. Evidence of site control for emergency shelter applications, and for nonprofits, your most recent audit and your evidence of 501c3 nonprofit status. Is that it, or do we have something farther down the list? No, that's it.
Yeah, that's.
Next slide. So here are the local objective criterion, and we're using these to select 1 to 2 projects to submit to the state. Applicant experience, and those points will come from, when we look at the application form, you'll see there's a form number 1, Roman numeral 1, and program design, form 2, and so on. Those are both 20 points. Then need for funds and local priority. That'll be in form 3. And the need is 10 points, and the local priority is 20. And we went through a slide on what local priority is. So impact and effectiveness, this is where we're looking at the HMIS information to see how you've done in terms of permanent housing placement and length of stay, length of homelessness, and then also leverage, 30 points total. Cost efficiency, here we're looking at in a previous program which you've operated, it could be a previous ESG program or previous program funded by other funds, but for the same type, say rapid rehousing or emergency shelter, what was your cost per permanent housing exit? That's why we need your 1 year of expenditures. And then finally, to what extent does your project meet our local plan, which is actually 2 plans. We've got the 3-year framework, the updated 3-year framework, which is on the H4H website. And we also have the local coordinated homelessness action plan, which was a state required plan that we submitted recently. So they're both on our website, and it's worth 10 points. You're meeting the objectives of those plans. Next slide, please.
Okay.
When you submit, are you doing this one, Cheryl?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
So, where and when to submit, we have talked about this process being twofold: local applications and the state applications. So for local applications, which is due February 14th, you need to email your application packet. So all the information, it's helpful when you put it into one packet. Email it to myself, Cheryl Norte, at santacruzcountyca.gov, and to Tony Gardner, consulting at yahoo.com by February 14th at 5 p.m. Please do not send us any paper copies to our office. Everything should be done via email. If you're having any challenges, please do not hesitate to contact us and we'll figure out a solution. Once we are done and the 2 one or two applicants are selected, you need to go through the HCD, which is a state application process, which is on the eCivis portal. Now, that is a link to the portal. It's the due date is March 28th. The portal is going to be open on January 31st. So that is in what, 4 days. The portal is going to be open. So you can, like Tony said, you can look at it, browse through, do, a sample application if you want, but don't submit anything, just to familiarize yourself with the portal itself. But your state application is due in March. So between February 14th, February 26th, actually, when the final approvals are done, you would have quite a lot of time, almost a month, to actually put your application together into the state portal by March 28th. Please note that you can also submit it early. Tony and I, over the last 4 years, we usually do not like to wait till the last day to submit applications because, there could be a potential crash if too many people are in the system. So just to avoid it, we usually encourage folks to submit it a day or two at latest, before the final day. But that is just a recommendation. You don't have to follow that. And this is our last slide. If you have any questions about this process or have any technical assistance needs, especially I know there are some organizations that is going to be their first time going through a similar process. You probably have a lot of questions. Tony and I are available from now to answer all your questions. You can email us separately, and we can huddle, find time to meet with you and just go through your questions if you do have any. Thank you all so much. I will like to pause now and open it for questions. Okay, so yes, Jana, you do have some questions. You're open to unmute. You're welcome to unmute and ask.
Hi, thank you. Just a few quick questions on the Excel application, the local application, which I really like. I was curious about, first of all, there's one place where it says under the need for funds, Form 3, question 1 and 2 looks to be a longer narrative. They said explain up to 1 page. Are we wanting to attach a Word document there, or how best should we provide those narratives?
Yes, Jana, that is the intent, to attach
Okay.
The narrative.
Could be a Word or PDF document.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And it's what you'll see listed in that checklist that we went through.
Got it.
It's one of those. And actually, in a minute, we're going to go through the application form.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe my question is just one more. Maybe I'll ask it and then you can feel free to tell me you're going to go over this question in a minute. Okay. But so under the Form 2 program design, I was just curious about the best language under implementation status. If it's something we are already doing, for example, are we planning to, if it's already something we do, should we just put implementing, meaning that we're going to continue doing it, I assume. Okay, perfect. Thank you. And it doesn't matter if we're using these grant specific funds for that or not. It's just if we're going to do it.
Yeah, it's just if you're doing it now and you're going to do it. Cool. Yeah. I mean, if you're not going to do it, then well, I mean, you have to do it under law, under the ESG requirements. So.
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Jana. Okay. Miriam is from Housing Matters, I believe. She's asking, for the program expenditure and HMIS report, is it better to cover 10/1/23 to 9/30/24 or a 12-month period ending January 2025?
No, the first one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so 10/1/23 to 9/30/24.
Thank you.
The only reason why you would deviate from that is if your first program year started after that.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Mike is asking a question. Mike is new. How does this relate to core grant? Did it replace it? Will we send out the slides, and can we add you to the email list? We can add you to the email list, Mike. We will send out the slides, and this is not related to the core grant, I believe. And it's not replacing the core grant. This is entirely separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, yeah, I mean, people who have core grants might be interested. I mean, if you were using your core grant for an ESG eligible activity, then core funding could be match if it's for the same time period.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we go through?
Yeah, let's go through the application. Yeah.
Okay. Give me a second, please.
Sure.
And somehow it closed on my system.
Or what, should we do the checklist first then?
Yes, sure.
Do that first.
Give me a sec.
This is where you find all the materials.
Yeah.
This is the H4H website under funding opportunities.
Yes. I'm posting the link here in case people want to just follow through as well. So we're going through the local application. Oh, we'll do the checklist first.
Okay. So this is, the local application checklist and submission instructions. You'll enter your applicant name, your project name, and then the instructions are, when and where to submit the application, what the deadline is, and then you check off that you've attached to all the required things, the application form, the budget, the governing board resolution. Again, you must use the state approved format, and it can be a draft when you submit it to us, but has to be fully executed when you submit it to the state. The need narratives, that's the one-page document that Jana was talking about. The supplemental narrative, only for agencies that have received ESG funds in the past 2 years. The amount of each of your most recent 2 ESG awards, the amount you've expended from your most recent 2 awards, and the number of persons and households you've served in those 2 most recent awards. Then your HMIS and comparable database report, your program expenditure report, evidence of leverage and match commitments. Again, we really want this because we're going to base your leverage points on this. Your written policies and procedures, site control for emergency shelter, and then audit and IRS evidence for nonprofits. And don't send copies of anything, just email it. Note that this is not if you're selected by the policy board, then you also have to submit the separate ESG application in eSNAPs. We're kind of pounding you over the head on this. I just want to make sure no one thinks they're done with the application once they submitted this. If you've been selected, then you go into eCivis and you complete the HCD application, which is separate from our local application. You are responsible for reviewing and understanding all of HCD's ESG application requirements, for meeting all their deadlines, for submitting a complete ESG application, and all their required attachments in eCivis. That makes it sound really hard and difficult, but I think the eCivis application is going to be really easy. I think it's a non-competitive application. So for those of you who have ever submitted a non-competitive application to any civis, you'll know it's fairly easy. Yeah. Okay. So I'm done with this checklist. Can we
Okay.
look at the application?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me pull this.
So we, as this is opening, I'll tell you, we, in designing this application, we went back to when the days before ESG had the days before the State Department of Housing and Community Development ESG program, before they had eCivis, they had an application form which was based on Excel. So we've tailored this local application for our local purposes, not state purposes. This is, just for our local review process, and it's not exactly the way the state had it. We actually, Cheryl had modified this form for our local questions. So there was a cover page, and then this is, the first page of the application, really. So this is just basic applicant and project information, like, the name of the applicant, address, contact people, and all of that. And then the name of the project and the address of the project, if that's different from the applicant. And then you check which project type you're applying for. And then you give a brief project description addressing the questions in there. Can you scroll down a little bit, Cheryl, please?
Mm-hmm.
There, and so, to give the reviewer a general, like sort of a, like a brief description of the overall project, so that they know what you're talking about. And then you fill in charts A and B. Chart A is like how many people the program will serve, and number of households that will be served. So that could be different than the number of people. If it's a household with 3 people, it would be one house, 3 people, 1 household. So then you fill in bed capacity in chart B. That's only actually for emergency shelter. Chart B is for emergency shelter. Every other project uses chart A. Okay. Next slide, please. Next form. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the first scoring form, which is applicant experience. So how many years of experience do you have operating the ESG activity proposed in the application? Like, so if you're proposing emergency shelter, how many years have you been providing emergency shelter? And there's a drop-down menu you'll see. Cheryl, can you click on that drop-down?
Under which one?
Under A, row A, to the right, the yellow. Click on that. Well, it's hard to see, but 6.5 years would be the highest points.
Yeah.
Or 6+ years for experience. Now, if you...
So it's either 6+ years,
Yeah.
3.5 years,
Yeah.
or less than a year.
Yeah. So say you haven't operated an ESG activity in the past, but you've operated a similar type program. So you've never had ESG funding, you haven't complied with ESG requirements, but you have operated, say it's a rapid rehousing program using other funding, could be, whatever, SSVF or CalWorks housing program, or state of domestic violence housing program. How many years of experience have you had operating that activity? So you can, it's the same drop down menu. And then if you're selecting B, we want a brief narrative of the similar activity. So you only complete C if you've based your experience on B. So you can do either A or B. You can do them both if you want. But if you have maximum experience under A, you'll get the maximum points. You wouldn't need to do B. So, or C. Sorry, I think I might be getting confusing on that. So anyway, if you have questions about it, let me know. So also D, you know, if you've used the above, list up to 3 similar programs that you have operated. So if it's like an SSVF program, you would say, you know, rapid rehousing, location, you know, Santa Cruz County time period, whenever it was, in the principal source of funding, VA, SSVF. Now, E, for applicants that have received ESG funding in the past 3 years, you up to 20 points could be deducted based on whether you've had terminated or disencumbered ESG funds, whether you've had any unresolved monitoring findings in ESG that pose a substantial risk, and if you have not submitted your annual reports to ESG in a timely manner. So we ask some questions here which get at that. Next slide, the next form, program design. So here, it's going through what our core practices for in program design for ESG and also for our local COC. So it's coordinated entry, housing first, and progressive engagement are identified as our core practices. So, and this chart's divided between, there are rows for emergency shelter, and then there are rows for rapid rehousing, and then there are rows for street outreach. So just complete the section that's applicable to your project. So if you're emergency shelter, you don't need to fill out the other rows. So in this case, okay, coordinated entry, participation in program, screening, triage, and access. A, all referrals to the program, including screening for potential eligibility and prioritization, occur according to our COC's coordinated entry system protocol. So implementing, not implementing. So yeah, so if you're not completely involved in the coordinated entry system, you could, you should be thinking about getting involved with it if you want to get these funds. So, and then I think I'm not going to go down line by line here. You can look at these yourself. I just wanted to give you a sense of how this works. We'll be doing the scoring on the basis of how many that you're implementing. Then also program staffing patterns. So we want you, okay, to list the job titles and the duties of each staff and FTE of each staff person who will be providing direct client services in the proposed ESG activity. And we'll be using this to, you know, assess your program design in terms of, you know, an appropriate staff to client ratio in indirect services. So then, can you scroll up just a little? Did you switched forms, right? Okay.
Yeah, I did.
We were done with that previous form. All right. So this form here, this is the form, you know, the need for funds form. So in here, we've entered the most recent homeless population and subpopulation data from our point-in-time count. So you can see here, you know, how many people of different population types are sheltered in our COC, how many are unsheltered, and the total amounts. And then also our housing inventory, our most recent housing inventory count for emergency shelter and rapid rehousing. So you can see, if you scroll down, how many families and units and beds and adult-only beds are in emergency shelter, how many are in rapid rehousing. So, that's our current, as of our most recent housing inventory chart. We don't know numbers for street outreach. So if you're applying for street outreach, we would like you to insert your total caseload capacity here in this yellow form, where in the line that says street outreach, it says total caseload capacity. So that would be how many clients that you're engaged in outreach at a single point in time. So it could be, say you're working with 25 clients at a time. That's what you put. It's not for the whole year. It's not like 150 clients in the year. It's 25 that I'm currently engaged with at a single point in time. So narratives. So we would like you to use the above data, the point in time count data, and the housing inventory chart data to explain why there's a high need in the community for your program. Use your data to support your analysis of the need. And then we also want to know what populations the activity will serve, like it's families, individuals, or whatever, and how the data shows that there's a strong relative need for that population. And then if you're targeting any subpopulations, explain why there's a need for targeting for that particular subpopulation. So that could be like you're serving individuals, not just individuals, but you're targeting a subpopulation, people who are chronically homeless as opposed to generally homeless, or people who you're targeting people with HIV/AIDS, for example. Explain the need for that. So the COC priority level questions. So we have some questions here to determine whether you're meeting a COC high priority or medium priority. So rapid rehousing programs identify the percentage of your ESG funds requested that will be used for rental assistance. So if it's 50% or more that you enter into that first line, then that would be in line with a high priority project. And then the percentage of households served who will be families with children exiting emergency shelter programs. And if it's 100%, which is what we're looking for, that would be high priority. So, and then if you're claiming that you are providing rapid rehousing services to people to families coming out of emergency shelters, we want to know the names of the shelters you're working with and a brief description of your prior working referral relationship with that same shelter. And then if you're an emergency shelter program, we want to know what best describes the shelter. That do your clients come and go on a nightly basis, or are they admitted for a continuous period? And are your residents offered supportive services and resource linkages to help them resolve their homelessness? So this is how we're trying to figure out whether your shelter is going to be a medium or a low priority. Next one, please. Here, so impact and effectiveness. So here we're going to look at your, so what is your level of project performance using data from your HMIS report for October 23 to September 2024 or most recent year, or your comparable database for victim services providers. So, you put in here your reporting period, and then you indicate whether it's from an HMIS or comparable database. You provide, you attach your HMIS report, comparable database. If you have any questions about what report to use, let us know. Typically, it would be what we would call an annual performance report for that 1 year period, because that includes the kind of data that we need. There's a canned annual performance report in HMIS, and I assume your comparable database has the same. Basically, if you cut, I don't want to go through this line by line, but if you go down to line 25, the data points we're looking at is average length of stay for people who left your program. How many days before they left your program? And in general, it's better when you house people quickly, you know, that they leave your, you know, they exit your program into a, you know, a permanent sustainable situation, you know, in a shorter number of days. That's a good thing. Then the next line would be total number of leavers who exited to permanent housing. And then at, you know, A, column B, total number of individual leavers who exited to any destination. And then you divide, you know, A by B times 100 gives you the percentage of leavers who exited to permanent housing. And when we say individual leavers, what we mean here is just the total. It's not just, we're not like saying you have to serve only individuals, you can serve families, but here you would put in, like say you have 3 families serving 10 total people, you would put in 10. And say, you know, 2 of your families with 6 people exited to permanent housing, you put in 6. So, and you know, divided 10 by 6 would be 60%. Then, so leveraging, we're also asking for information here based upon written commitments you provide for leverage to be available during the first funding cycle, year 1. We're not asking for your leverage for years 2 or 3, just year 1. And again, leverage includes your required cash match. So, you know, your required 100% cash match plus anything beyond would be your total leverage. So you can list the value of each written commitment that you have, whether it's cash or in kind, and whether the written commitment is attached to the application. I mean, you could conceivably list things for which you do not yet have a written commitment, but it'll affect your points. We want to know what you're looking for, what you're hoping to get a written commitment on. That could help you, but it won't help the points. Cost efficiency, the next one. So here, the main thing is, you know, that you'll attach your 12-month program expenditures report, and it should be for the same date period as your HMIS report. So make sure you include all the expenditures for your program. Like, so that includes like indirect costs which you associate with that program, or admin costs or HMIS costs, as well as direct service, you know, your direct cost for providing the services. Then you put in the total number of leavers who exited to permanent housing, and that should be the exact same number as in the previous form. And then you divide that to get your average cost per permanent housing outcome. Next one, please. Cheryl, Form 6. Okay, here's where we're assessing, you know, what you're doing to meet the objectives of the local homeless plan. So provide a brief narrative to how your proposal will meet the goals and strategies of the updated 3-year homelessness strategy. That's our updated 3-year plan, which is on the website. Then list 5 of the most important key objectives of the updated 3-year homelessness strategic plan your proposal will meet. So in this, if you look at the 3-year plan, you'll see that there's a section that's about goals and strategies. So this is where you talk about how your project meets the goals and strategies. But there's a separate section of the plan which lists key objectives. So this is where you would just list which key objectives your proposal will meet. and then scroll down. So this one, there's as I mentioned before, there's the Regionally Coordinated Homelessness Action Plan, which was a state required plan that we needed to receive state HAP funds, and which is also posted on our website. So here you provide a brief narrative description about how your project will align with the different jurisdictions' roles and responsibilities in this plan. So you put that in there, and then under D, you list, up to 5 of the most important key actions under the systems performance section of that plan that your proposal will meet. So I think I'm done with that. Can we, are there any questions?
There was just one question from Justine.
Okay.
She stated that if I'm correct, that this funding deadlines are for this current year. So if they're submitting a local application before February 14th, would we not be eligible for the state until next year, as we've missed the state deadline? So I was about to type in a response saying they haven't missed the state deadline, but if you can provide a response, that would be great.
No, but I think that we say 2024 ESG funding. That's really confusing. That's the state FY. The state received this ESG funding from the federal government in FY 2024. That's why we're calling it 2024 funds. It's not, you haven't missed the deadline. I'd say the state missed the deadline by not releasing it until 2025.
Yeah.
Justin, thank you. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions?
I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
How can I access the recording for this today?
Cheryl,
it's still recording. So once I stop and it saves and we send out the email, we are going to send the link to the recording as well.
Perfect. Thank you so very much, you guys. It was great information.
Perfect.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Let me see. Stop recording.